I would also say that there's honestly no incorrect way to squat. People are sitting down onto the toilet from 1 or 2 years old. We've been squatting. Our anatomy is built for squatting. Whether someone is having pain or not is independent of which form or technique or modality of squat that they're doing. And I would say is more speaking to what's going on with their own allostatic load. And there's a good buzzword for you, because that includes all kinds of internal and external load. So external being the weight on the bar and the positioning that you're in. Internal load being stress, fatigue, lack of sleep, hydration, nutrition, etc.
Well, all right, everybody, welcome to Live Deep, episode 11. I am here with my friend. This is Dr. Rand Michael. Rand, thanks for being here, buddy.
Happy to be here.
Great. I'm going to do a quick resume drop, and of course, have you just kind of fill in the blanks for me. But I am super excited to have you here. Obviously, Ultim Fitness, that's the company, and believe it or not, this is the first fitness-specific deep dive as far as the podcast goes, the Live Deep podcast that we're going to do. And I'm super excited about it and couldn't be here with a better person. So I'm going to call you Rand, but you're Dr. Michael. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to call you Rand if that's okay. Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. That's a DO. I'm going to ask you to explain the difference with a DO and an MD in just a moment here. Captain, United States Air Force. You're a husband, father of 3 beautiful little girls. You've got extensive experience in training, personal training, resistance training, endurance training. We're going to get into all those things. And a man of faith. And we're going to talk about your faith and how it kind of influences your life, which I know is a big thing. But thanks for being here, man. We're going to do a deep dive. Anything you want to add about yourself and your background?
I think you covered it for the most part. I don't want to leave a laundry list. Happy to expand on any aspect, though.
As far as this episode, what I'd love to do, Live Deep is the name of this show. And what that's about, obviously it's Ultim Fitness, but Living Deep is about finding, living, and leading a life of physical, emotional, mental, relational, just the whole person fitness. And yes, I want to do a deep dive on the physical fitness side of things, and that's probably where we'll start. But I also want to talk to you about your personal habits, your disciplines, habits of your household. You're a very busy guy, which is why I'm grateful you're here. But it's one thing to talk about fitness, and I do want our audience to walk away with practical steps that they could potentially incorporate in their own lives. But then it's a whole nother thing is like, how do you build a life that's fit on a deeper level, but also supports the fitness side of things? So a little bit of rant on my part, but selfishly, and we chatted a little bit about this offline. I'm 39 years old, and I'm going to be turning 40 in November. And I've had this goal that I want the 40-year-old version of Jesse to be the fittest version of Jesse that ever lived, right? And I've always playfully, and I told my wife this, my goal so far, decade by decade, is that when I'm 30, I want to be tougher, bigger, faster, stronger than my 20-year-old self. And when I'm 40, I want to be bigger, faster, stronger. I think it's going to get harder as I get into my 50s and 60s. But my goal this year is to just craft the fittest version of me. And I'll say that when I turned 38, out of nowhere, I started getting all of these fitness-related injuries, which is why I love having you here, because you're a doctor and you're also a massive fitness enthusiast. But we're talking torn labrum in my shoulder doing jiu-jitsu, tore my calf muscle doing sprints, strained my MCL doing a sprint triathlon. Feels like I'm hitting that point where I'm getting tread on my tires and I'm starting to get injuries. So for me, to be fit at 40 or my fittest at 40, I also have to start for the first time being very, very mindful around the areas that a lot of us just rush right through, or maybe don't have the patience to stay in, which is mobility, proper warm-ups and cool downs, injury rehabs. I'd love to touch on some of those things. But where I want to start first, when you think about your current fitness routine, because I know you've done a lot of things, heavy strength moves, you've done endurance. What is your current fitness routine? Let's unpack it, talk why, kind of have a good conversation around it. But what are you up to as far as physical fitness these days?
Yeah, absolutely. And you touched on a lot of good things there with some buzzwords that I'll try to hold back for now until we get there. But as far as my current routine is what I've found to work best for me, is to kind of split the year up. I like to have 6 months in a strength season, 6 months in an endurance season. And I'm actually just about halfway deep into my strength season right now. Last year, in my endurance season, I built up to a 50-kilometer run, which was the Marine Corps Ultra in Arlington, Virginia, 50 kilometers. It was just as terrible as you'd imagine. Was able to complete it even though it was unseasonably hot. It was like 75 degrees that day. It was rough, to say the least. It was the longest I've ever run, but well worth it to train for, and I had fun doing it. Now in strength season, I'm focusing on, I like to focus on the super total barbell movements. So that's a snatch, a clean and jerk, a squat, bench, deadlift. And I do periodized movements. So where I'll do those same 5 movements all the time, but periodized in blocks, increasing with volume through time through a hypertrophy style block. And then we'll flip to a strength focused block with top singles and back off sets through another block, which would be 4 to 7 weeks for me.
Wow. Okay. So now I'm gonna unpack some of the terms that you just threw out there. All right. So first, and by the way, I wanted to ask. So you're a DO as far as your medicine. You're an ED doctor. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So I don't think I know the difference. I don't think most people know the difference. But what is the difference with an MD and a DO as it relates to being a physician?
Yeah, so in America, honestly, there's almost no difference. Internationally, many other things can be said, but in America, there's doctor of osteopathic medicine and medical doctor, or MD, like you said. So DO, MD. The main difference in America currently is that there are separate licensing exams, and the licensing exam for DO includes something called OMT, which is osteopathic manipulative therapy, OMT. And that's similar to what most people think of when it comes to chiropractics, which is manipulative therapy using the hands on the patient to put them in positions that usually are uncomfortable for them, but to try to break through some of those barriers to increase ranges of motions, mobilities, flexibilities. Whereas chiropractics is limited to the spinal motion, osteopathic medical therapy or manipulative therapies extends to every joint in the body. So the reason I chose to go the DO route versus the MD route for my medical training was because of my background in strength training and fitness. And I wanted to be able to have that kind of functional anatomy understanding of how each joint worked and moved through space. And now that said, as I've moved through time and learned more and practiced more, do I think there is a role for osteopathic manipulative therapy in medical practice? Honestly, it's pretty limited. Based on the available evidence and which is a large body of literature. It's not very limited at this point. I like it for myself, from my understanding and my knowledge, but I'll be frank and honest, it's not something that I use regularly with my patients because I don't want to trick them, nor do I want to have them spill their wallet out at a visit with me. I'm not trying to charge them as much as possible. I want to yield them the most benefit. And where I've learned and where I see the most benefit is through things like strength training, like all around fitness, all of the things that you're talking about, and Altum highlights.
Well said. Thanks for the explanation. So back to your personal training. So what I know about you, Rand, is again, you're very, very well versed. You're very diligent in research before you take action to move it, particularly around like, a fitness program. So I know you've kind of done everything. You've done strength training, you've done hypertrophy training, hypertrophy meaning largening muscles, bigger, more aesthetics, right? So what I heard you say there is you're constantly every year rotating or going back and forth between a strength cycle or season and endurance. When you say strength, and then I'm going to ask you why do you do that? Why is that where you've landed and assuming what you'd recommend for people, or maybe it's not, but what does strength mean when you use it? Because I don't know that everyone listening knows specifically what strength training means. It could mean different things. So what does strength training mean to you when you say that?
For me and myself, and again, what I recommend to everybody is completely different because it's based on individual preferences and goals and what things they want to be able to do with their life. The things fitness wise that I care about for myself specifically right now is being able to run really long time, which I just think is cool, and being able to lift really heavy on a barbell, which I also just think is cool. Nothing novel or unique or special about those things, but they both touch into the things that go back to the all around fitness that contribute to multiple metabolic energy systems that can keep my bones dense and my muscles full and be able to have that longevity and health aspect as well at the same time. Whereas my expression of fitness comes in terms of 1 rep max, snatch, clean and jerk, squat, bench, deadlift, and being able to run for a really long time.
Olympic moves, right? A lot of those moves you just mentioned there, Olympic weight training.
The snatch and the clean and jerk, yes, and then the powerlifting movements, squat, bench, and deadlift.
Okay. So when you say strength, you're referring to that's I love how you said the my expression fits, but you are referring to barbell movements, compound movements in what type of rep ranges? I heard you say earlier you'll cycle in some hypertrophy. Traditionally, I want to hear your response to this, but that's your kind of somewhere 6 to 8 to 12 rep range and sets all those things. But strength lifts for you, are you hitting big 1 rep maxes? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, so along a hypertrophy block, which I'm actually at the tail end right now, most of my sets are between 6 and 10 reps. I really like the myo reps model as well, especially if I'm short on time or a specifically time constrained session, and I have a close grip bench press with my legs up. Instead of 3 sets of 10, I can do whatever I could do for 20 reps, and I'll stop at about 18. I'll rack it, take 5 breaths, do another 5. Rack it, take 5 breaths, do another 5 until I can't do 5 anymore. So that's called the myo reps model. And there's pretty good research that shows that has similar hypertrophy benefits to just like a 3 by 10.
I like it. I like it. That's different. So are you saying then when you're straining for strength, are you not also working in some endurance training, even if it's like smaller bouts of lower intensity stuff? Or are you just all in on strength and then all in on endurance training throughout the year?
During strength season, I put endurance on maintenance, and during endurance season, I put strength on maintenance. So, what that looks like, for example, last year during endurance season, while I was increasing my running mileage, where I subscribe to the 80-20 endurance training model. So, 80% of my runs are easy, 20% are harder. During that, I'm only doing 2 weight training sessions per week, and I'm just doing like 3 sets of 5. Nothing crazy, a weight that I've done 1,000 times before, keeping it comfortable. For me, that looks like a 405 squat, a 405 deadlift, and a 315 bench. That's what I did twice a week for 6 months. Nothing more, nothing
Mm.
less.
All weights that the general public will never touch, by the way. um, what say you to this? I think, and if Dr. Jake, our Altum Fitness Mobility Rehab coach, is listening, shout out to him. I just went to see him because I was squatting low bar back squat, heavy for me, not for you. And he and I think that I have a herniated disc as a result of that movement. And this would probably be the third time in my life I've had a significant injury doing a barbell back squat. I like to think I know what I'm doing. My form felt good. Everything felt clean. Something happened, and now I can't. It's bad. It's a pretty bad injury. Here's my question for you. What say you to someone like me who's seriously thinking that it's okay to not do heavy barbell lifts anymore? And then maybe even more controversial, potentially, I don't think that there will be a significant decline in my physical performance and well-rounded health if I don't do heavy barbell movements. What do you say to that?
Let's take a few steps back because you said some things there.
Yeah.
So let's treat this kind of like an interview session or like a medical visit. So
Okay.
tell me what you're experiencing.
I'm experiencing significant stiffness and pain when I sit on a chair like this for more than 10 minutes or when I get out of a car. I'm experiencing discomfort when I sleep because there's no position in my bed that allows my back to be comfortable. And I'm experiencing pretty significant sharp pain when I do any type of like twisting motion, like lying on the floor with my child and trying to play with them. So it's pretty much constant and chronic for about 2 weeks, Dr. Michael.
Got it. That sounds pretty debilitating, and I'm sorry you're going through that. But there's nothing about that that screams herniated disc to me, nor does it make a difference of what is happening at a tissue level based on that description to me. So I could take an MRI of your back and it may or may not show a herniated disc. I could take an MRI of your back a year ago and it may or may not show a herniated disc. There are plenty of studies that show MRIs of people with asymptomatic or have no symptoms at all, and a very high percentage, increasing with age, have herniations in their back. So whether that's related or unrelated to your pain, nobody knows. Pain is a complex experience. People have pain whether they back squat or don't back squat, whether they high bar back squat or front squat. Every person of every socioeconomic level, of every level of fitness, experiences back pain at one time or another. I'm guessing that you're planning on sitting on the toilet for the rest of your life at some point. So to get down onto the toilet most safely and most comfortably, that's a squat. So whether you want to practice squatting via back squat with a barbell, via front squat, via goblet squat, via hack squat or leg press, whatever kind of flexion of the knee and hip you want to do is not unique, beneficial, or special, but you should be doing one of those.
There it is. Okay, so and that gets to my question, so that's encouraging. Because I'm not saying that I'm not going to do a squat motion. I mean, there's all sorts of different variations of squat, as you said. But where I'm starting to move towards is, and the question of you is, does the load or the weight, does it have to be on my back to get the benefits of a squat, or can it be beneath me, as some of the squats that you mentioned? I know one of the big rages right now are these belt squats that people are doing because, again, it takes the load off of the spine. So the question in there is how significantly important it is to specifically put a barbell across my back to get the benefits of a squat for both fitness and longevity.
So to answer you directly, there is no difference. But to answer you more specifically is that there's nothing uniquely injurious or painful about loading it via a back squat either. So you're not more likely to hurt your back via a back squat any more than you are with a belt squat. So it's the same rate that you'll probably have back pain. And belt squats are very expensive and they take up a large footprint. So if that's something that you're comfortable, that most people probably aren't spending the money on or time to find or pay for a gym membership that has specifically a belt squat, that's on you and that's okay. But like I said, there's nothing specific, unique, or beneficial about that over a back squat.
Mm, that's interesting. And I'm not going to argue with with a doctor or someone like you because I know your credentials. But
Yeah, you're also welcome to argue. And
no, let's not argue. But I'm not going to debate you because you know the anatomy so much better than me. But I'll just say anecdotally, and that's all I have to go for. Anecdotally, something about squatting with a weight beneath me in some way, shape, or form feels safer given my, I don't know, anatomy or history. It just feels safer to me. But what I'm wondering is, because my first thought is, well, then why do so many people get low back injuries from squatting? But I'm going to answer my own question. It's probably because so many more people are squatting probably incorrectly with a barbell on their back, and that's why you have more injuries.
more to unpack, of course. So I would also say that there's honestly no incorrect way to squat. People are sitting down onto the toilet from 1 or 2 years old. We've been squatting. Our anatomy is built for squatting. So whether someone is having pain or not is independent of which form or technique or modality of squat that they're doing. And I would say is more speaking to what's going on with their own allostatic load. And there's a good buzzword for you, because that includes all kinds of internal and external load. So external being the weight on the bar and the positioning that you're in, internal load being stress, fatigue, lack of sleep, hydration, nutrition, etc.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna pull up and let me know if this is your recommendation, because I'm gonna move to a little bit more about your programming. But what I heard you say, and which I think should be encouraged to people, is squatting is good. However you choose to do it, it's not more dangerous necessarily to do it in one modality versus another, but definitely be squatting. So for people who are listening that maybe have apprehension, whether there's a skill barrier or past injuries and whatnot, would you recommend, or would you say that they have to barbell back squat, or they can choose any type of squat that they want and you're still going to get benefits?
They can choose any type of squat and they'll still get benefits.
I love it. That makes me encouraged because I don't have to go right back under a barbell again.
Hang on. The qualification there then would be because, so you specifically, so you're having pain with back squatting. Am I going to tell you to ignore your pain and just go back to back squatting? Absolutely not. I would say choose the modality or the range of motion or the intensity level to keep practicing squatting while maintaining a discomfort level of less than 3 out of 10.
Okay. So for me, what I've done, and I've probably done it too quickly, I've already pivoted to dumbbell Bulgarian split squats. And for anyone that doesn't know what that is, that's your rear foot up, elevated on a bench of some kind, and you're basically holding one or two dumbbells. I hold two, one on each side, and squatting down into that forward leg, full range of motion, nice slow tempo, pull it back up. And I'll say doing those most, because I'm doing one leg for 10 reps and then the other one for 10. The difficulty for me when I do it with the load that I use, load meaning the amount of weight for people listening, is around a 7 or 8. My heart rate gets jacked up because there's a little rest in between, and I'm pushing myself so that reps 8, 9, and 10 are significantly challenging for me. Sometimes I even have to do like a rest pause where I stop after 8, take a breath or two, finish the 2. So would you say that that's a good alternative to barbell back squats for me? Something like a Bulgarian split squat?
Certainly sounds like it. And if you're able to challenge yourself and get a full range of motion, that's fantastic. I'd also venture to say that the weight that you're using for these Bulgarians is probably less than the weight you were using for back squats.
To be specific, I'm doing Bulgarians with two 60-pound dumbbells, one in each hand, and I injured myself doing 315 with the barbell back squat. So yes,
So
it's
have you
much less.
tried back squatting with 120 pounds?
I can do that about 78 times straight.
So if you did the same thing with the slower tempo of just back squatting 120 pounds, I'm not saying that's better or worse, but I'm just drawing the comparison of that you're doing it with less weight. So I'm not surprised that you're having less discomfort.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a good point. That's a good point. Okay. So what I love, and I think what you just explained, I'm going to assume, but I'm noticing I'm going to stop and make sure I'm right here because you're going to correct me if I'm not. The same principles we just landed on there around barbell back squats can be applied to other body parts and muscle groups, right? So if it's a similar question around barbell bench press, you get a lot of people that complain about shoulder issues with that movement. Similar then, if you're having issues with that movement and you don't want to put in the time or the expertise and the skill development to maybe correct whatever the issue was, okay to grab dumbbells
Easily.
easily. Very good. Okay. I want to get back into your strength programming specifically and look at your split. So let's talk about your week of strength training, and then we'll talk about the maintenance of the cardio layered over that. What would you recommend? I know it's hard to make a recommendation when we're talking about a lot of people, but if you had to make a recommendation that's good for everybody, maybe not perfect for everybody around strength training, what does it look like? How many resistance training sessions each week? How long are they? How are they structured? Walk us through it. I think that'd be very valuable for people.
I like to stick to the federal guidelines when it comes to this. It's because it's the easiest, most straightforward, most easily referenceable as well. Anybody can Google the American Physical Activity Guidelines, and it'll be the first link on Google. So at least 2 resistance training sessions a week for at least 30 minutes each.
Okay. Bare minimum.
Bare minimum. And the movements that I specifically include then are a push and a pull in a vertical and a horizontal planes, and then a squat and a deadlift.
Okay. So bare minimum 2 days per week, full body. Let's say you're talking to, now I want you to put on your personal trainer hat. And let's just say someone comes to you, they have what I'll describe as a moderate level of experience. They've been training maybe with weights 3 or 4 times per week consistently, and doing some moderate amounts of cardio because they know about the benefits to their heart health and longevity. And they come to you and they say, Dr. Michael, I want to take this to the next level. And you say, what do you mean? And they say, well, I've plateaued or I've hit like kind of like a standstill with my aesthetics looks, like how I feel, how I, my confidence in how I feel. And also I've plateaued with my performance in the gym and some of the key movements. If you want to move them to the next level away from that, the standard or the basic you just said, what would you say to that person?
So most importantly would be training history and preferences. So training history, you mentioned moderate level, but specifically what amount that they're currently doing in terms of volume and tonnage. So are they already doing 3 days a week, 4 days a week, or 5 sets of 10? Are they doing some crazy amount of volume that actually we need to take a step back and start building intensity before volume?
And we say
Or
intensity, what you mean is the load, the amount of weight,
correct,
right?
intensity
Okay,
being external load, weight on the
perfect.
bar, on the machine, on the dumbbells.
Got it.
So in terms of the 3 levers to pull when it comes to resistance training would be intensity, frequency, and volume. Intensity being the weight, frequency being how many times a week you're hitting the similar movement, and volume would be total number of sets. I like to measure it in sets per week because it's the most straightforward.
I think a lot of kind of prevailing wisdom, or at least what people are prescribing to these days around the frequency lever, is every muscle group or every muscle should be worked with resistance training twice per week. Would you agree with that?
And you see the pendulum swing on this. I feel like when you and I were 10, 15 years ago, it was like once a week, like any more than that your biceps will explode.
Yeah, bro
No, so
splits.
now push pull legs twice a week is a very common bro split. Whereas it used to be like shoulders on Wednesdays, and that was it. You never hit shoulders again. So the pendulum swings. There's no specific frequency that's most common or best. Looking at progress wise, it makes sense to increase that frequency over time, especially if you're getting to points where you're no longer progressing.
For you then, where's the pendulum for you? And let's get back to your own training. What do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do a movement based split as opposed to a muscle group based split. So right now I'm weight training 3 days a week, and I am very minimalist. I try to maximize intensity while minimizing frequency and volume to get the most out of it, because my goals specifically are 1 rep max in the barbell movements. So my training is geared towards that. So I'm training on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And for example, Wednesday being yesterday, I did started with bench press, and I'm towards the end of my hypertrophy block, so which started at 3 sets of 10, very normal and obvious, and now I'm up to 5 sets of 10 with all three of the last sets of 10 are at an RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, of 8 or 9.
Okay. Explain RPE real fast because you threw it out there. I think that's a great takeaway nugget for people to know what that is.
Rate of perceived exertion is most simply a rating of how hard the lift felt from a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being absolute muscular failure, where you could not grind out another one even if someone was holding a gun to your head. And whereas a 1 would be on a bench press, you could throw it through the ceiling.
Okay. And you can apply that to running as well, right? Endurance training.
Absolutely. It actually started in endurance training and was just recently adapted to resistance training about 10, 15 years ago.
Got it. Okay. And we're going to put a little pin in that and come back to endurance training. But something I heard there, which is different than what I've ever done, and I like it, is it sounds like you increase the difficulty, my word, not yours, of your training over time by adding sets to your exercises, not by increasing the load or the reps. You're actually saying, okay, and I'm making this up, but like week 1, 3 sets of 10, week 2, 4 sets of 10, week 3. So you're increasing volume over time. Is that just as beneficial as what I would describe as more traditional in the bro weightlifting scene, where what you're actually doing is you're increasing the load, but keeping the sets and reps the same for each exercise?
I would say that that's more feasible for a more beginner or early intermediate, but as you get to late intermediate and more advanced, it's much harder to add weight. For example, I've added 10 pounds to my bench press in the last 2 years. The likelihood of me adding much to on the intensity side is very low. I do try to move the weight faster. For example, on these sets of 10, on the first week, it was, I believe, 275 was my hardest set of 10. And this week it was 305. So I am increasing the weight at the same time.
I like that. That's a great, and perhaps for me, going back to my barbell injury, my barbell back injury, I had been squatting for 6 months. And what I've been doing is increasing weight. So I like to do maybe 4 weeks or 5 weeks and then a deload week. Maybe another buzzword for you, but just a week where psychologically and emotionally, I don't have to push myself to that 9 or 10 of intensity, or the RPE, right? So what I was doing over time, and I knew this was going to happen, I'm adding more and more weight on that bar every 4 or 5 weeks. So when I get to that deload week, let's just say it's week 6, when I get to week 7, or what would be week 1 of kind of like a new cycle, I'm just making sure that I'm starting off with a heavier load than I did week 1, right? And I'm just continuing to build. And what I know eventually is going to happen when I do that is I'm going to get to a place where I can't add more weight on the bar. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
And then you get injured.
And what happened to me was, okay, I'm at 315, and candidly, I was doing 4 sets of 5 at 315, barbell back squat, and I got injured. And that seems to be like my pattern, because I hadn't thought of maybe just add a set, but keep the load the same.
Yeah, and that's a very normal progression, especially for the mid or late intermediate person who's like, well, why can't I add the weight like I used to add the weight? It's like, well, it's going to take longer now. So you have to be more patient. Because if you're building that allostatic load over time without a compensatory increase in strength, the fatigue is outweighing the fitness, and that's when you get injured.
Got it. Okay. Here's a question for you, and then recap, right? So you're doing resistance training 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. We're going to talk a little bit about what maintenance endurance looks like for you. And we don't have to go in too deep into the weeds on, your lifts and which ones you're choosing and why. But hearing you, Rand, and knowing you, hearing that you only lift weights, hear the word I said there, only lift weights 3 times a week surprises me. I would expect, probably because of your advanced level of experience, that you would literally need to be lifting weights 5 or 6 times a week to continue to get whatever adaptations that you're searching for. Have you found that lifting weights 3 times a week allows you to continue to get, I have to roll my eyes at this, gains, the gains that you're looking for? Or maybe those gains aren't the same or as significant to you. But just talk a little bit about that because it just surprises me that 3 times a week for someone of your experience level.
Yeah, so I was definitely at a period in my life some years back where I was five, six, 7 times a week, and it was much harder, honestly, much more taxing, much more sore regularly. And that was honestly when I started diving into the endurance world, and I more was using it as a break from lifting. But I found a specific benefit to myself that by detraining intentionally from weight training, I was able to get those gains, whether perceived or objective, sooner than I would have otherwise. So after I was had a detraining period intentionally, when I went back to harder specific weight training, I made gains faster.
Wow. And that whole time, like when you were stepping back into training, what about like body, aesthetics? Like, did you find that like your muscle maintained when you took a break from a chain, or did you need to constantly be feeding that beast to kind of keep the size that you have?
So the way I treat it nutritionally to complement the seasons is that I treat the endurance season as a cut and I treat the strength season as a massing phase. I'm definitely, I would call it more like deflated when it comes like in an endurance season, but I'm intentionally cutting and that's a motivator for me. I'm seeing my abs more, I'm seeing cuts in my legs more, and that feels good and looks good, and I'm happy with that. Whereas in a massing season in the strength side, I'm specifically feeding the beast and I'm getting bigger and stronger and it feels good.
Yeah. And do you find that year over year, if you keep that cycle going, you're stronger and then faster in both of those individual seasons?
It has so far. We'll see this year.
Let's see how it goes. Okay. Okay. Talk us through what the maintenance. So, and actually, a question I forgot to ask: how long are these seasons? So, how long is your intentional strength season, and then your intentional endurance season?
6 months, 6 months.
I love that. Nice and simple to remember. So, during the strength season, lifting 3 times a week, focusing on moving the bar fast, heavy loads, things like that, working towards 1 rep max. What does your endurance training look like? I know you do Monday, Wednesday, Friday with resistance. Talk us through maintenance endurance.
Yeah, so I'm midway through strength season right now. So that 3 times will turn into four towards the later end. But right now at three. And so as far as endurance training, it's every other day. So four endurance training sessions actually. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, resistance, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, endurance.
And if you needed to, let's just say schedule allowed, and we're going to get into your habits of the household and all those things, but if you needed to not do some type of exercise 7 days a week, what would you do then? Would you make those endurance sessions longer, or would you move them and have like a two a day? What would that look like?
Both of those are great options. I'm a big proponent from a habit perspective, which I think this is a perfect time to get into it, of doing something every day. So having it as a habit of this is my fitness time, this is what I'm going to do for fitness. And there are different flexible ways to adjust that based on the individual person or family or schedule. But having something every day, even if it's active recovery, which I'm not a big fan of the buzzword, but if that means going for a walk or a jog,
Why don't you like that one? Active recovery. I like that one.
because it's not actually increasing recovery.
Okay. Okay. What would you call it then? What would you call it? Like if say it's day 7, it's Sunday, it's like a Sabbath for most people, but you would recommend that you do something active. What would you call that day? Just do something active?
Low intensity aerobic training.
Oh, intense
Like,
aerobic training.
just call
Okay,
it what it is.
lists. All right. Yeah, I got you. When you're doing maintenance training, what is pick one of those days, maybe two of those days. What does that quote unquote cardio session look like for you? What are you doing?
So I have an alternate goal this year that I haven't divulged yet. But from January 1st to December 31st, my aim is to include a total of 3,058 miles of self-propelled mileage. So that's from Portland, Oregon to Portland, Maine. So coast to coast. Just in my own head, challenge with my own self. Nothing specific. I'm specifically including more biking right now so that I can add to that mileage.
Self-propelled meaning you're riding a bike, you're running, you're jogging, you're doing something by your own, yeah,
Yeah,
physical.
including
Okay.
hiking, biking, running, swimming, any kind of self-propelled means.
I love it. I love your goals. They're great. So what do you do then? Do you take that mileage and divide it up by 52 weeks and then break it down? And how do you keep yourself on track to that goal?
That's the intention. I'm a little bit behind already, unsurprisingly. It's already February. It's basically like last time I calculated that, I think it's like 65 miles per week is to stay on track. So for my four endurance training sessions, right now I'm doing two bikes, one run, and one ruck.
This next topic, I'm going to ask you about zone two cardio, heart rates, right? Zones one, two, three, four, five, looking at percentage of max heart rate, percent of max heart rate. Most common way to figure it out. Tell me if you agree. 220 minus your age.
Most common, yes.
Most
Most
common, but
accurate, questionable.
we'll stick with that. All right. So zone two cardio, something that I've actually started to really focusing on, I'd say in the last year. A lot of what I've read and been exposed to is that you want to get at least 90 minutes of continuous zone two cardio a week, more preferably 2 hours or 120 minutes. Is this something you agree with? And do you think that you're getting that just by the nature of the goal that you just explained?
So I'd say 150 minutes is actually my minimum prescriptive dose,
Okay.
with a 300 minutes maximum, unless someone's actually aiming to increase endurance for a specific goal or training. So that 150 to 300 minutes is kind of the sweet range and what's included in the National Physical Activity Guidelines. So again, that's just what I stick to for broad recommendation. It's the easiest to refer to. I like zone two, but zone two, being a buzzword also, doesn't necessarily have to include heart rate. For exertion purposes, for endurance training, I like easy, medium, and hard much better. So I like to recommend at least 120 minutes of easy training per week with 30 minutes of hard. I think
Cardio.
that's cardio
Easy.
wise.
Okay. Question for you. If let's just say I am tracking my heart rate, because I am. If I'm picking up, let's just say I'm doing a typical resistance training workout, right? Where you're doing 10 reps, rest, 10 reps, rest, 10 reps, whatever. If my heart rate is in quote zone two, the entire 60-minute resistance training, does that count towards that weekly goal for zone two cardio?
It doesn't count at all, for better
Why
or
not?
worse. Because when you're taking that rest period between, so this is also why I'm not a big fan of heart rate prescriptive training. So did you have caffeine right beforehand? How was your sleep? How was your hydration? All of those things are heart rate modifiers. Or if you had a recent illness, your heart rate variability might be increased as well. So your heart rate might be artificially inflated. I don't know about you, but me with some kids, I am relying on caffeine a good amount. So that's artificially increasing my heart rate. So even on some of my easy runs, my heart rate might be in the 160s or 170s. That doesn't mean it was zone five. It was actually pretty easy, but my heart rate was pretty high.
Why does that happen?
Caffeine increases your heart rate. I don't think it needs to be more complicated than that.
I like it. No, okay. All right. So don't count, if anyone's listening, don't count all of your heart rates throughout the week as towards a cardio goal of zone two. It sounds like it needs to be intentional, steady state cardio at that level. Why physiologically, and this might be a tough question, but why physiologically is it beneficial to do zone two cardio intentionally, right? In cardio activities, but it doesn't matter longevity overall health wise if you're just in zone two for random reasons like caffeine or weight training.
I'll try to be as simplified explaining this as possible, but they discovered the zone 2 heart rate kind of afterwards as an effect rather than as a cause. So when you're doing the aerobic training at an easy level, your heart rate is seen to be at that level, but really the benefits come from the heavy breathing, the continuous motion, especially with your legs or with your arms if you're doing something like rowing or arm cycling. But that continuous movement is by increasing the vascular pressures to create more capillary beds, to increase the enzymes and stem cell relation at the level of the tissues. That's where the benefit of the low intensity aerobic cardio comes in, at your lungs and at your tissues. The heart rate doesn't really make a difference, to me at least, and based on what I know.
Relevant. All right. Takeaway for the non Dr. Rand Michaels of the world. If you're trying to get zone two cardio, do it doing cardio. Don't think you're getting it from doing other ways is what I'm hearing there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What do you think about this? So, I have 3 young kids and running a business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Time is fleeting and limited, right? Same for you. And I know that ED doctor, you've got all sorts of things you're involved in. You have a young family as well. You're doing a lot of training. What are your thoughts on this? And it gets into more of like the mental fitness and habits and things like that. But oftentimes what I do to make sure that I'm getting intentional zone two cardio training is I'll go on a treadmill because it's safe and I'll put it on an incline and I'll put it, and I know exactly what it needs to be on. It needs to be right around like 9 or 10% incline, somewhere between 3.8 to 4 miles per hour. And within 5 to 10 minutes, I get in a nice sweet spot with zone two, as long as I don't play with any of those levers, no more incline, no more speed, right? And I can stay there for about 60 minutes. What I do, and here's the question, what I tend to do is I'll multitask. So I will, let's just say I'm behind on emails or I'm trying to draft an important email. I have to listen to a podcast episode like this and just kind of pull out clips. But so I can multitask, I will do my zone two cardio in a safe piece of equipment and then just like take care of other things that I have. Any advice there for me? Am I missing some opportunities around like mental meditation, health focus, or is it kind of like however you can get it, get it?
A really good quote that I like, especially with a young family, like you mentioned, is if it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. Even if it's not the most ideal, optimal way to do it, it's still worth doing. I'm a huge fan of multitasking, and we know for a fact on the research that multitasking takes away your performance at both tasks that you're trying to do at the same time. But it's worth it. It's still worth it to do the cardio. It's still worth it to listen to the podcast or catch up on emails. So I would say keep doing that. And if that's the way you got to do it, that's the way you got to do it.
Yeah. The way I look at it, Rand, is look, I've got to do that podcast review and I've got to get that zone two cardio in for longevity and health, right? But I'm not going to turn to my wife and say, well, I know you've had a tough day too, but I'm going to go get my zone two cardio and just run. So I'm trying to find ways where I can, have the best of both those. But I love that quote, man. Say it again. If it's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly.
Exactly right. And there are ways around it too. I'm like I said also a big fan of multitasking. The things that I've done to get through medical school and medical training, I've listened to tons and tons of textbooks and podcasts through while I'm doing cardio. You can have a stroller. I'm a big fan of the stroller run. I bring the dogs and strollers and I go for a run outside to get the kids out of the house to let the wife relax or do whatever she wants to do during that time, or take them in the morning. And I have a treadmill in the garage as well, so I'll do treadmill while they're playing outside. Any kind of combination of multitasking is worth doing.
I love it, man. I love it. Oh, so I wanted to do a deeper dive on the endurance side of things, but there's with you sitting here and looking at you, there's so many things that you have to offer that I want people to hear that I'm going to move a little bit quickly towards more things like habit, lifestyle, faith, things like that. But before I do that, let's just talk that other 6 months, your endurance training. Just give anyone listening some kind of like tips, ideas on why it's important to train cardio and focus on it in certain season, and maybe some takeaways that they can incorporate into their own life. Keeping in mind that someone stepping into endurance training that might be listening to this probably doesn't have the 50-kilometer goals that you might have.
I mentioned earlier, I really like the 80-20 method. And then I like rating the exertion in terms of easy, medium, and hard. So if you keep 80% of your training in easy, 20% of it hard, I think that'll go a long way. And the easiest lever to pull when it comes to endurance training is volume. So starting as easy as you need to get for as short a distance as you need to for it to be easy. And how I rate easy is the talk test. Can you talk on the phone with someone during the cardio activity and they won't know that you're doing the cardio activity?
That's good. And why does that test line up with what's happening with your breathing and your heart? Like how is that physiologically a good test?
Because you're still doing the motion, you're still activating the muscles, pumping the blood through the capillaries at a rate that's sustainable. So the main key comes in the sustainability and consistency, that you're able to increase that over time without the fatigue outweighing the fitness.
I think you know this, but I ran my first sprint triathlon last year, different, right? Shorter. And preparing for that, I heard, and at first I was like, that can't be true. But I heard, and really backing up your method there with the 80-20, that if I spent a considerable amount of time training in that easy realm, I was measuring heart rate. Sounds like I didn't necessarily have to, but creating what was called a cardio base would also allow me to perform better in those harder realms or those higher heart rates. You agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the language is a little bit of semantics, but it's because essentially, like I mentioned, the capillary pressures is that you're increasing the amount of oxygen that your tissues can extract from the blood at a time. And the easiest way to do that is through easy training over time. And the better they get at that, the more efficient your muscular tissues get at extracting oxygen from the blood. They're still going to perform that efficiency at higher intensities.
Okay. And then here's a practical question for someone listening to take away. If they're going to incorporate the 80-20 rule, again, 80 in the easy, 20 in the hard, moderate level of experience training, I mean, no injuries, can run, but just kind of like the average population, want to start focusing on the endurance side of things on top of resistance training. So here's my hypothetical question, which I'd like to hear a recommendation from you. Let's just say someone listening says, okay, great. I like Rand, I can lift 3 times a week and I can budget 45 minutes each time. And also, I can run or spend time towards cardio, whatever the modality is, 3 more times. So that's 6 days of intentional training each week, 3 of which are resistance focused. You got 3 days to work with Coach Rand. What would you advise them to do with those 3 days of cardio training?
If the total is 30 minutes spent training, 25 of those easy, 5 of them hard, and they can split them up depending on what modality they're in the mood for. If they want to do ski erg or if they want to do a treadmill, you could do some intervals, or you can do 25 straight easy and finish 5 hard, whatever makes sense and works the best for them. And they'll see progress over time. And then that's where the motivation then kicks back, and it's a positive feedback loop to increase.
That's good. Okay. And it's funny. I would have assumed that you would have said, let's just say 4 days. I would have assumed that you'd say take 3 of those days and make it 30-minute, in this case, jogs, and keep it easy. And then take the fourth one and make it like a hard one, like a harder run. But it's actually somewhat refreshing to learn and to know that you can just take each session and, do 25 minutes of easy and then maybe top it off with like a 5-minute kind of like sprint or run. I feel like that's
Yeah.
a good approach. Yeah.
And especially for a beginner and early intermediate, it's very motivating to finish runs or finish cardio activity, pushing yourself. That way you don't just like stop after it being easy. You're like barely sweating. You're like, all right, now I'm done. Whereas if you finish with a sprint, it's like, wow, that was really good.
Yeah, you get figure feedback loop. You get that like mental sense of accomplishment, and you're kind of building up to it the whole time. Like, all right, I know it's going to come, and like here it comes. You finish it, you feel good about it. And is there any kind of residual or ancillary benefit to having that intensity more frequently, to doing it, say, 5 minutes 4 times a week of having that intensity versus kind of loading it into one day?
That might be in the weeds a little bit, but as you move towards like expert or advanced intermediate level of training, there's definitely a usefulness for threshold type training, is the exercise science word, where you have a whole day of threshold training or a whole session of it where you're pushing yourself to try to increase that VO2 max, even if it's in the percentage points.
Got it. And VO2 max has a direct correlation with longevity, does it not?
It does, but correlation, you said it, not causation.
Got it. Love it. Always correcting. Good stuff, man. All right. I want to pivot and spend the time that I have with you now to move away from the specificity around the training and talk about lifestyle. That's the word I'll choose. You're a very intentional guy, and I've always known you to be that way. And you're also big with habits, cadence, routine, and kind of crafting a lifestyle that supports what's important to you. And what's important to you is your relationship with Jesus, your relationship with your spouse, how you're showing up as a father. And I would say those are and probably in that order, Rand.
Yes, sir.
Those are big for you. Then obviously your vocation, what you do, which you happen to be a doctor and you have the ability to impact a lot of people every day, just in the halls of the ED that you work, VCU. So then there's your job. And then there's your fitness. And I would say that's probably still your order, right? So it's a lot of things to be intentional about, to make sure that you're pouring into those relationships and those activities 24 hours in a day, just like every other person. And it's a big, broad question for you, but how do you do that? How do you make sure that you're pouring into all of those things that are important to you and those people and those relationships, while also not depleting yourself to a level where it's not sustainable for you and your own health, mentally, physically, and emotionally?
I would say first and foremost, I'm not perfect. I have my own struggles as well. I still get mad sometimes. I get frustrated. Kids are whining. There's stuff on the floor. Dinner's not made. Everything has to get done. It's frustrating. That's what it is to be human. So I'm by no means got this down pat. But I'm doing my best. We all are. So for me, it comes back to, like I mentioned earlier, if it's worth doing poorly. And then another quote that rings in my head frequently is flip the switch. So when I flip the switch, if I'm at work, I'm work Dr. Michael. When I'm home, flip the switch, I am dad. When I'm out on a date with my wife, I am husband. When I'm at church, I am follower of Jesus. So I'm flipping these switches to be that identity in that environment.
It's not easy to flip the switch. You know that, Rand. So let's just say, and I'm just riff here, but I can see this happening in your life. Let's just say you're wrapping up a shift, coming home from an ED, right? Coming home from the emergency department. And let's just say there was an outcome that would stick with you. And let's just say, and I don't know if this happened, but let's just say you start to relive or question some decisions that you make in the course of being an ED doctor. And that's on your mind and your heart. And you're driving a car. I don't know how long your commute is, but you're driving home and you know you got to flip that switch, in this case, to being dad. And dad needs to show up for those kids and put that dinner on that table and pick those things up off the floor and respond to them and their needs while taking your own needs and pushing them down. Not easy. How do you do that? And I'm not saying you can do it perfectly, but what are some talk us through what that feels like in that moment to be able to flip that switch and then maybe revisit that shift, but you can't do it in the moment, right?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. I think journaling is a really good outlet. It's not something that I have the time or effort that to do regularly. For me, I think you worded it well there. I just kind of push it down in a sacrificial love type of way. And I'm going to put a smile on and I'm going to hug my kids and I'm going to be there for them because that's what's most beneficial for them. So, in short, it's worth it. Even if there might be those short term negative feelings or outcomes, the longer term net positive benefit is worth it. So whether that's writing out a long venting text to my wife, whether that's just some kind of outlet, I can't even describe how many silent car rides I've had home just processing difficult shifts. And I'll spend whatever amount of time that I need to process it, and that's done. And now we flip the switch.
But you are processing it. You are
You
finding
can't not.
ways. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think some people just continue on in that hypothetical. Some people might not ever come back to that shift in their mind, and they might not come back to and resolve whatever the questions was or the ruminations were. They'll just move on. And if you do that chronically over time, frankly and candidly, you'll get to where I wound up last year. That caused me to come out and start Ultimate Fitness, where I was just every single day, I wasn't getting back to the things that I needed to get back to just to process and move on. And it adds and adds and adds. And you know my story, I would turn to alcohol to kind of suppress that and to mute it and to manage that and to cope with it. And that became unsustainable and unbearable. And then that's how I got to the point where I got to, which is why I asked you that question. It's because it's hard. It's just hard to manage all of those things at the same time. Not really a question in there. I'm just kind of responding to you. That's all.
Yeah, and you remind me, and something I think of frequently, it's a choose your hard situation. It's hard to be obese and have obese related illnesses. It's also hard to do fitness regularly. It's hard to not process the things that you go through and end up in an unsustainable, inconsistent life. It's also hard to process them regularly and go through the emotions needed to get over them. For me, it's like looking at the end goal and working my way back. Is it worth it to do that? It's worth it. Is it worth it to
Yeah.
do this? It's worth it. Do that. So choosing at each juncture the way that is in line with my priorities and values is simply worth it.
Rand, so you mentioned earlier just a couple things that I'm fascinated about with you, and it still stays into like habits. And maybe there's another word that I've learned later in life called rhythms. I just love using that word to try to describe what we're talking about, like the rhythms of life, the cadence of life. You mentioned, taking your girls out for a stroller run, to give your spouse some time. I want to stay there and talk about like rhythm. So when it comes to your prayer life, when it comes to fitness, what are some of your rhythms, and even making sure you're intentional with your children? But what are some of the rhythms that you've found? Because I think we all change them from season to season. But what are some personal rhythms of yours that ensures that you're maintaining those investments into those relationships?
I'm an all-in type of guy. If you haven't been able to see that so far, and it's difficult to maintain routines, especially when I'm flip-flopping schedules. I might be working nights half the week, days half the week, evenings the other half of the week. If I'm home, I'm the morning person. My wife is much less of a morning person than me. So I'm bringing the kids down. I'm making breakfast. I'm getting like everything ready and cleaning up, and I have my morning chore list essentially where I feed the dogs, feed the cat, feed the chickens. I do
Chickens.
all that. Yeah, chickens and ducks. We got some eggs that it's been well worthwhile.
Okay.
Take the trash out, take the recycling out, all things that I'm expected both internally and externally to get done if I'm there for the morning. And then similarly, if I'm there for the evening, I'm going to make dinner. I'm going to clean up the house. I'm going to do all those things because that's what I'm internally expecting. And I've asked my wife to expect of me. It wasn't a predetermined thing. I like doing those things. I like being liked for doing those things by my kids, by my family. I like being the provider and doer around the house. And I'm not perfect by any means. There are definitely times where I'd prefer to be lazy and just melt into the couch. And we were kind of all getting over a cold, and I definitely had some of those times the last couple days. I apologize for it. I leave it in the past, and I move on and get back on the horse.
There's this book, a great book that we're actually going through in our church called Habits of the Household. It sounds like what you and your wife have figured out is where are your strengths, where are her strengths, and then the habit that you build is like, oh, this is where you're going to be on point, and this will allow you, right, to do what you need to do. But then I'm assuming switch roles and just find like a nice little kind of rhythm that works for your family. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like the way that you word rhythm. I wouldn't say that it's regular or routine, but I would say that it's a rhythm. So it's a give and take. It's a back and forth, just like a song, that it can go one way or the other.
Yeah. And speaking of that, maybe it's not consistently throughout the year, but what rhythm do you currently find yourself in with your training? When do you train? How do you work that into it as consistently as you can, understanding that there's going to be anomalous situations where you can't, but when are you training and why do you choose to do it that way?
I have my own gym equipment. It's right now in the basement because it's freezing temperatures outside. So in the winter, I move it down to the basement. In the summer, I keep it in the garage. So for example, I worked overnight 2 nights ago and was like out for the count yesterday morning time. And then I had some time in the evening. I got my bench, clean and jerk, and front squats in within 40 minutes in the basement. And then right before dinner, and then we eat dinner and then get ready for bed. Today I have a run in. I haven't done it yet, but I'm planning on it sometime this afternoon, whenever it works for everybody else. So I kind of keep my priorities, especially in terms of fitness, behind family priorities. So if there's something that we're all going to go to, then I'm going to go. I'm not going to lose out or miss out on anything because of my fitness. That's been a big priority for me, and I try to keep it there. I'm, again, not perfect, and there have been situations where I'm out for a run and everybody else is doing something, but I try to keep that as the priority. And especially during like the build up to the 50 kilometers last year, there would be many times where I would put the girls to sleep and then I would go out for a run. So I tried to keep 90+% of it to where they were inaccessible to me, either sleeping or out doing one of their activities, and I would get a run in during that.
Yeah, man, I do the same thing. And there's something about when you put in the extra effort to carve out for your fitness so that it doesn't impact or inconvenience your family, that there's something about that that just feels good and feels right and feels true. And I'm the same way. Sometimes even at the detriment of my sleep, like I'll get up early and say, you know what, Jesse, like if you want to train today, you got to earn it and you got to carve out that time. To me, there's no excuse to kind of neglect, family responsibilities. But I'd love to hear that that's your perspective. What would you say to someone? Because people labor over, hey, there's an ideal time to train, anabolically speaking, and a morning fasted, you got to run this way. It feels to me that you found that, hey, that either that doesn't matter or it doesn't matter to you. But what would you say to someone that gets like really stuck on the rigidity of a routine and working out the same time every day? In your experience, does it matter?
I would say prove it to them, because there's nothing about it in the literature or otherwise that says that. If someone feels better the way they do it, I would say continue doing it the way you feel best. Personally, I enjoy weight training the most first thing when I wake up if I'm in a regular schedule. So if I had a regular schedule, I would do weight training in the morning and running in the evening, probably every day. I would probably do both every day if I had the capability and time and availability. Essentially, it doesn't matter, and it doesn't matter to me.
I love that. I love that. So basically, just get it in. If you find a time that works for you, do it then, but don't get all caught up under being perfect in terms of the timing of your training. Rand, what's next for you, man? I know you got a lot going on with the military and the Air Force. We didn't even touch on that and your clinician career. What's next for you as you look forward in 2024? I know you got a big race you're going to be training for, but what are you up to?
Yeah, so I actually just heard yesterday that we'll be moving to New Mexico this
New
summer.
Mexico. New
So
Mexico.
straight
Okay.
up middle of nowhere, right
All
off the
right.
western border of Texas. We're currently in Virginia, so that'll be a big move that we'll be gearing up for. Looking forward to all the aspects of it. Keeping expectations to a minimal. So whatever's there for me is there for me, and I'm looking forward to it.
Love it. Love it. And you are on Instagram, Dr. Captain underscore, right?
Correct?
Got got quite the following there. What are you up to on Instagram? You just I know I keep tabs on you. You're lifting 600 pounds in your basement casually, like no one else can do. But people can follow you there and just kind of keep tabs on you.
Yeah, absolutely. As I transition to New Mexico, it is my plan to build out my Instagram a little bit more, especially in as I've been working in the ED and ICUs. I've been much busier, so I haven't done too much. It's mostly just a training log. I'm happy to respond to DMs or chat with people on there anytime, but planning on building it out a little bit more focused on lifestyle.
That's amazing. And I neglected to add this. You've generously came on as the Ultimate Fitness Strength and Conditioning Coach. You're in our Ultim tribe there, and you can respond to questions there. And you're also helping to design the strength and conditioning programs that we have in our soon to be released Ultimate Fitness app. So we're very grateful for that. Again, you can follow Dr. Rand Michael at Dr. Captain underscore. We'll make sure we link to it in the episode notes here. Thanks so much for coming on, man. If you'd be willing, would love to have you on a couple times a year just to kind of unpack fitness. And as seasons go throughout the year, people are always changing and doing different things. But if you're open to it, man, I'd love to have you back on. And thanks for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Enjoyed every second of it.
All right, Dr. Rand Michael, everybody, thank you.